Grant Pearsell is an award-winning urban ecological planner with over 40 years experience in the environmental sector. In 2020, he retired from the city of Edmonton, where he served as a director in the urban planning branch with portfolios that included urban nature and biodiversity, strategic parks planning, and data and analytics. Currently, Grant works part-time with the Global Platform for Sustainable Cities, which is sponsored by the World Bank, on their Cities for Biodiversity project, providing training on urban nature and biodiversity to more than 50 cities in 30 countries in the global south. He also volunteers for local, national, and international projects promoting urban nature and biodiversity. Grant has lived in Edmonton for over 30 years and is an avid urban cyclist, nature lover, and traveler. And we are very honored to have Grant in our city. And so without further ado, I'll turn the presentation over to Grant.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you everyone for coming. It's a pleasure to share my thoughts about the River Valley. It's quite a big title here. I thought I'd just unpack it a little bit. I really feel that part of our focus should be with the River Valley is restoration. There's been a lot that's happened over the years. I'll get into that. Climate resilience is one of the big issues that we're facing today. And I think the River Valley has a big role to play and help us meet some of our challenges. And the zoning bylaw modernization is coming in, and there's an opportunity to maybe do things differently. And then finally, the nature-based solutions is something that's quite topical. You know, and I was just in Paris at the end of the year when we were doing our training of these 50 cities that Steve talked about, and every one of them knows about nature-based solutions and are trying to find a way to implement them. So this presentation gave me an opportunity to try and figure out how that could work right in our own very own River Valley. So our River Valley, especially within the European settlement, really transformed our River Valley into an industrial landscape for a while, and for good reason. This is where people were able to survive, where they were coal miners, mining gold or trying to get gold out of the river, and lumbering, that picture right in the center. If you look at the size of those logs that were taken out, I wonder where that forest was. That's just sort of etched into my mind. But that's not the only thing. It's continued on through the years. And I've just used as a representation here is the METS plan and the freeway through the River Valley. And this particular picture, I believe north is to the right. Also, I was trying to get a number on how much of our River Valley is protected as a natural area. And the best number I can come up with is 30%. I'd like to get a little bit more focused on that, but it might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less, depending on how you do it. So the idea that the River Valley should be considered in a natural state, I think is erroneous, but there's things we can do, and I'll get into that as we go. So nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are not like something new, but it's a new way of looking at things. So what I have here is this slide, is the evolution of this concept. And it started back in 2002, and it's been building and building, particularly with the global NGOs and the Convention on Biological Diversity, Secretariat, and these have been adding up into finally to the convention just approved nature-based solutions in their mandate, and I'll get to that. So as I said, it's nothing new, but there's a lot of work has been going on over the last, I'd say, 20 to 30 years on how to work with nature to do some of the functions that we need, particularly in our cities, but also throughout the landscape, whether it be industrial, rural, agriculture, so on. So all of these, the problem with all of these different approaches has been that they're often done within a specific sort of discipline, certain engineers, civil engineers, ecological engineers, hydraulic engineers. We have landscape architects, we have scientists, all been working on this. So nature-based solutions is an umbrella concept that brings all of these together and helps to organize them and bring people together in an integrated way to apply these different techniques. So let's just get right to the definition. So nature-based solutions are defined as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well benefits and biodiversity benefits. There's a lot into this, and it has sort of become the definition that a lot of people are going to, but it's not the only definition. When we look through this, some of the key words are providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. It's both. It's about seeing humans within nature, not apart from nature. It's also a big part of this is nature-based solutions address societal challenges and their actions to protect, manage, and restore. So that is the general idea, and I'll show you what some of those, how that looks like and how we can break it down further. So some of the major societal challenges addressed by nature-based solutions are shown in front of you. I won't read them all out, but a couple of them: climate change mitigation and adaptation, disaster risk reduction, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, and a few others in here. Now there's 7 here, but I've seen other lists with 12, and there's nothing magic about these major societal challenges. I think the society that defines it will tell us what our challenges are, and I'm going to take an attempt to say what I think ours are within the River Valley. So I put this one in here, this slide in here, because what I really liked about this is with nature-based solutions, we're safeguarding nature and we're safeguarding society. And I think we've come a long ways. When I started my career, it was sort of conservation and nature should be out there away from people. And then the city shouldn't have nature because cities don't have nature. There's been this evolution of thought and a really soul searching throughout the whole world to find better ways to live on this planet. And nature-based solutions is only one of them, but I think it's a powerful one. Another way to look at our societal challenges is just the recent COP15. COP15, that's the 15th Conference of the Parties on the Convention on Biological Diversity. And one of the big pieces that was agreed upon there by almost 200 countries was this global biodiversity framework, which was adopted, which gives a framework for all countries to figure out a way to address the biodiversity crisis. Now, this biodiversity framework has 4 goals and 23 targets. And I don't want to spend a lot of time going through the targets, but I paraphrased these because each one would probably take half a page or more or less. But I'll just take you to the flavor. On the first 3, it's about bringing the loss of areas of high biodiversity importance close to 0 by 2030. Just stop the loss. Number 2, ensure that by 2030, at least 30% of areas of degraded ecosystems are under effective restoration. First time we've seen that on an international scale is it applies. We've gone too far and we've got to start restoring what we had. And number 3, ensure and enable by 2030, at least 30% of terrestrial inland water are effectively conserved and managed. Those highlights are mine. So there we are. It's like we've also got to protect it. we've got to stop it, we've got to restore it, we've got to protect it. So moving on to these three targets, 11, 12, and 14, to me is really starting to hit home for us in the cities. And I just reflect back, I was at the COP10 in 2009 in Nagoya, and that was the first time on the Convention on Biological Diversity that all the countries agreed that subnational governments like provinces and cities have a role to play in protecting biodiversity. Before that, in 2009, it was actually kind of controversial. It's not controversial anymore. So target 11 is restore, maintain, and enhance nature's contributions through nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches for the benefit of all people and nature. That's a big move forward, in my opinion. Target 12 is significantly increase the area and quality of connectivity of access to and benefits from green and blue spaces in urban and densely populated areas. There's another big one that we wouldn't have thought about in 2010. So we are making progress. And number 14, ensure the full integration of biodiversity into environmental impact assessments within and across all levels of government and across all sectors. I really think here in Edmonton, we maybe not convinced that environmental impact assessments are necessary, and I think they really are. And this is what a lot of smart people have deliberated on and have concluded, and we should take all of this to heart. So what do they look like on the ground, these nature-based solutions? So here's an array of different ones. There's many of them, but if you see a lot of them we have in our city already, although we don't think of them holistically, and they don't come top of mind when we're trying to figure out alternatives, say, to something like more gray infrastructure versus green infrastructure. But we look at river and stream restoration, protecting urban forests, building green corridors, constructed wetlands. We do a lot of that here. And maybe we're not doing the best with river floodplains, but we're a lot better than a lot of other places. So as I'm giving these little slides, I put the document that it came from, and this is this nature-based solutions catalog that was produced by the World Bank, and it's hundreds of pages. It's really worth looking at. So taking the same thing and just looking at a sort of a cross-section at a city scale, these can be placed anywhere, any place. And the idea is those should be, when you're trying to find a solution to one of your problems, you should be seeing, can a nature-based solution do that job? Some argue it's cheaper, some argue it's better. Maybe true, maybe not when it comes to the cost, because there's a land cost for a lot of these. But if you have the land, it seems like a very good way to go, rather than using concrete, steel, which have really high CO2 emissions footprint and take a lot of energy just to move it into place. Or maybe there's something you can do just with nature. So to help you understand this, this is still in flux, but there's it's pretty much agreed there's three types of nature-based solutions. And lots through the literature is just saying there's type 1, type 2, and type 3. So what does that mean? Well, type 1 is just protect what you have. Like, you don't need, that is the very best. So what this inverted triangle is showing is the most important thing to do is protect what you have. But the second one is enhancement. This is a very kind of gray area. People are having problems, or not problems, but interpretations where they say, is a type 2 more really a type 3, or is it a type 2? Doesn't matter. I don't want you to get hung up. The types are. but it's like protect what you have, enhance, restore, rehabilitate areas, and then create new nature-based solutions, such as constructed wetlands, which we do a lot in this city, and we've done it for at least 25 years in Edmonton. So I'm going to break this down, show you the various types, and so you understand kind of what the theory is and how they're organized. Now, I think it's very important to say right now, not all nature-based solutions are suitable to put into a zoning code, because it's not the appropriate place for them. So what I've done is highlighted these areas in green, or these lines in green, and those are the ones that I feel quite confidently can go into the zoning bylaw. So establishment of protected areas or conservation zones, we've done that a little bit here. Limiting prevention of specific land use and or practices, that's really what a zoning bylaw is about. And ensuring of continuity of ecological networks. That one I was sort of on the fence there, but I thought about it, and I think we could do that through the zoning bylaw, and I'll give you an example at the end. And then the other part is controlling urban expansion, which we do. You don't have to give the zoning to build certain types of development. If you don't have that, you can't build. So that forms a boundary on expansion. Moving to type 2, and this is the in-between type of nature-based solutions. And they're like management approaches seeking to develop sustainable, multifunctional ecosystems and landscapes. These are maybe, like, in my mind, they are management plans. They're perhaps boardwalks to keep people away from sensitive and critical places. Integrated pest and weed management is a type of management, but that's not something you could put into a zoning code. But I think you could put wildlife passages and crossings, trails, pathways. And now moving into the type 3, this creation of new ecosystems. There's lots we can do, and we do it all the time in Edmonton. Urban parks and gardens, cemeteries, school sites, riparian buffer zones, restoration sites, green roofs and walls, floodplain zones. These are all things I think can go into the zoning bylaw. Something like constructed wetlands is not something I think fits within a zoning bylaw, because it doesn't, that's not the kind of document that a zoning bylaw does. Zoning bylaws typically say, here's the general purpose, here's some of the uses that you can have, and here's the regulations that go with it. So I'm just using this to show you, it's not an exhaustive list. It's something that I've just pulled from the different literature sources. I do find that this is in flux, and it is usually done by a certain specific lens of people looking at it. You might be agricultural, disaster reduction, hydrology, whatever it might be. So this is going to develop, particularly now that the convention is calling those out as being a preferred approach. So let's move into the zoning, nature-based solutions in the River Valley. I think the question we really need to ask when we're looking at the zoning bylaw, and particularly the zoning bylaw renewal, is the question is, what do we want to do? Right? That leads to a lot of things. And we looked at a lot of the why, we looked at the vision. The North Saskatchewan River Valley and Ravine System is a protected, connected landscape that supports ecological resilience and promotes healthy living through opportunities for recreation, active transportation, learning, and gathering in the tranquility of nature. So this is the vision that was taken from the ribbon of green, northeast and southwest, and the rest of the system is being done now, but I really like this one. And it leads us to say, okay, if you're going to enable that or enact that vision, what do you have to do? Before I move on, I want to just point out something that what I'm going to propose works way better on public land than private land. And I pulled out this map from 2005 that I produced, and I couldn't find anything newer. But what it does show, the areas in green are the A metropolitan zone. That's what we consider as our main river valley zone. AG is agriculture. Agriculture is actually pretty good for achieving this vision, I think. We can talk about that later if you don't like that idea. And then the red here shows some of the other zoning that's in the river valley. It's not a lot, but there's some of it's there. I think up in the northeast, that is probably the landfill site. There's the University of Alberta in there. I think the red is actually Big Island. Down in the bottom left there, that little red dot. So some of these are compatible with the vision as well. So just keep that in mind. So I looked at what are the societal challenges that we could use nature-based solutions for in the river valley using the zoning bylaw. And we also want to achieve the vision for the river valley in the ribbon of green. So the three, I just took them straight from that other slide I said before that came from the International Union on the Conservation of Nature. But these ones are climate change mitigation and adaptation, environmental degradation and biodiversity loss, and flood and disaster risk reduction. So I'll take you through how I think that the zoning bylaw could work. But before I do that, when we talk about climate change, you often hear people talk about adaptation and mitigation, but what is resilience? And I like this slide from the Union of Concerned Scientists. And what they're saying is we have to do both, mitigate and adapt. And the reason in my view, is assume that the city somehow got our carbon emissions down to zero and nobody else did. We'd still have to adapt. We're in a global system that is affecting us. And even if we didn't, which we're probably unlikely to do so, in my opinion, the adaptation would happen, even if we did achieve all our mitigation goals, because that CO2 is going to be in the atmosphere for a couple of hundred years. So what you can do is work both ends of the problem. Continue to adapt, like make sure you're not in a floodplain, that your structures aren't going to burn down if there's a wildfire, things like that. But at the same time, you should be doing the energy transition. You should be working to mitigate all those CO2 reductions. And by both of them working together, you can shrink that resilience gap and make your city much more resilient. So the image on the right, though, it shows there is an overlap between mitigation and adaptation. And that interests me because you're doing double duty with one kind of approach. So let's say a nature-based solution could be tree planting. Tree planting, you are mitigating climate effects because they sequester CO2 and form a carbon in the trees. And there's also adaptation because they provide shade and sort of stormwater function as they collect water in their leaves. So there's many things we can do here. So here are 5 nature-based solutions for the zoning bylaw modernization. This is just blue sky thinking on my part, and I really want to test it with our audience tonight. So here I'm saying create a natural area conservation and restoration zone. So this would be a zone that's all you could do in it. There'd be some other probably things you'd want to do, like have some buildings for maintenance and things like that. But essentially, it's about conservation and restoration. So I would say, what if we were to amend the current natural area zone to include restoration but the general purpose was natural area conservation, restoration, and ecological connectivity. So if you were to go and put these, identify these areas, that would mean they couldn't be built on. They would probably wouldn't be restored right away. You'd have to get some money, but you know what had to be done on those lands. So I pulled out these two images on the right because I really think that we should be restoring our creeks and the interface with the river. And here's this, the one on the bottom is Mill Creek. It's just turned sideways from what you're used to. And then the other one is Grove. And, you know, we have, Edmonton, I've learned, is a biodiversity hotspot for fish. We have about 23 species here, more than any place in the province. And we only have one place left, fisheries place left, and that's at White Mud Creek. We should, for resilience, we should be opening up and restoring some of these other areas. And that's exactly what the convention is encouraging us to do. Next is, how about a flood disaster reduction zone or restrictive overlay? Now, there's two ways you could go here. If you carved out a zone and just said, this is only for flood disaster reduction, the uses you can put into that, or the buildings, or what you would construct, would be things that could be flooded out, and it wouldn't cause a lot of damage. If you were to flood, you know, if you experienced a big flood like we have in 2015, that was 50 feet or 15 meters deep. And you look at the red line on this map, and it was recreated by a consultant to figure out what the flood risk was. This is basically the flood line in 2015. I don't know what the frequency is, but of that flood. But what I've been observing everywhere, I called it 1 in 200 is the new 1 in 100 flood. Calgary, after its big flood, what was it, 2013, something like that, they're now going and using 1 in 200. They're skipping the 1 in 100. There's a lot of reasons for that. Don't have time to talk about it, but it is something we should bear in mind. And a flood like Calgary had, the experts say, could easily happen here. There's no magic that it happened in Calgary and not Edmonton. There's been a similar type of flood up in the Grand Prairie area and a similar one in Colorado. So this would be an amendment of the floodplain protection overlay, which is section 812 in the zoning bylaw. So this would give us another opportunity to restore the natural landscape by keeping, you know, a lot of activities off the floodplain and planting some more natural plantings and restoring the river valley. Another one that I quite like is this riparian setback regulation, applicable to all river valley zones, and that'd be the ravines as well. But the riparian area is one of the most ecologically important areas in an ecosystem. It's the transition between wet and dry, and a lot of species take advantage of that, and it's very critical for their life cycle. This is something we have not really taken on in any serious way in Edmonton. I think it's high time that we do. And development setbacks, they're really commonly used to manage development. This is not a new idea. You don't want, a lot of times you see it, the setback for your yards, you have to have a front yard, no matter, you know, what kind of property you have. You have sort of setbacks, so separation space, so you're not looking in people's windows, things like that. And I think this could be, there's a nice little blog from the Edmonton Area Land Trust on these riparian areas, so I encourage you to look at that. And the diagrams here just give you a rough idea what I'm talking about here. is the setback from the water's edge, which is the aquatic habitat, all the way to the upland habitat, and protect that ecological gradient. So I've been asking some of my colleagues that know this work more than I do, and they're talking about somewhere between 25 and 100 meters. And I would say this would be something that would be restored to ecological functioning, and something this important to Edmontonians. I think the riparian habitat should not be overlooked. And then I have some additions. This is my second last one. Some additions to the general regulations. In a zoning bylaw, they have the zones, they have the general purpose, the uses, and the regulations. But there's another part of the zoning book that just has some general regulations. And I thought, it's the river valley. What if all structures had to have green roofs in the river valley? I'm a little bit uncertain about whether that would be something for the zoning bylaw, but I'm willing to push it. Wildlife-friendly fencing. See the picture in the bottom right there? We've had a lot of cases of deer being impaled on fences. This is a really, really simple fix. You just can't build those fences. You just will not get a permit. And I'm not saying they should be like the center one, but there's all kinds of guidance on how to build fences that are friendly to wildlife. Other thing is within the regulations, there are landscaping provisions and what you have to do in terms of landscaping, and even kind of the plants you have to use. It's not very deep, hard or technical, but this is in the river valley. Why not have native plantings and landscaping throughout? That would be our default position. I'm not saying get rid of all grass and everything like that. Turf is really good for families and playing games and things like that. But just be smart about it and use it in a good way. And you don't have to mow it, and you get a lot of habitat value. So the picture on the right is just some random picture I found, but to me, it really spoke to me. If this was our river valley in many places, I think it would be terrific. And then to the general regulations, there are regulations about environmental impact assessment. I think those need to be dusted off with an eye to be more inclusive so people can see what's going on, and transparent so that decisions can be made and the people of Edmonton can understand what's at stake and what the trade-offs are whenever there's a particular development that has to be done. And so the last one is a bit fanciful in my opinion here, because a regional urban wildlife corridor overlay zone. Now, the picture on the right is from the Natural Connection Strategic Plan. That purple line, if you can see it along the river, is just donating that this is a regional wildlife corridor. And if you look from Jasper all the way to Hudson Bay, Edmonton is the only major city and the most likely to block this continental connectivity. I was talking to people from the Elk Island National Park at the Beaver Hills session a couple of weeks ago, and that really is their vision from a national parks point of view, is trying to connect the Great Plains. And this is one of the last continental connectors, and what we decide to do as a city is going to affect us quite a bit. And finally, the zoning trumps policy in the event of a conflict between the two. So zoning really matters. Why zoning trumps policy? Because zoning is about regulation, and people get development rights from that, and you can't take that away from people without compensation or else them being a willing person. So in summary, the approach is new. It is not novel. I've been doing some literature review. People are starting to use this in different countries. When I say this, using the zoning bylaw and nature-based solutions to manage their societal challenges. So they could, I really think that those three that I mentioned before, climate change mitigation and adaptation, environmental degradation and biodiversity loss, and flood disaster risk reduction, can all be addressed in the zoning bylaw and should. I think it's actually a must. And also including nature-based solutions in the zoning bylaw modernization project in the River Valley. It really would enable ecological conservation, restoration, increase climate resilience, and also save money for present and future generations. In terms of if we're building in the floodplain and we have to keep building, we're going to have to borrow money. That's the sort of idea. So I think that this is a good thing to explore further. I'd like to hear what other people have to say about it, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions. I've listed here my contact information. Up in the top panel, these three plans, City Plan, Breathe Edmonton's Green Network Structure, and the Ribbon of Green are all integrated policy plans going from citywide with the City Plan to Breathe, which is the public open parks and open space plan, to Ribbon of Green, just dealing with the River Valley. All of those three work together. And then on the bottom are just some of the documents that I've looked to put this presentation together, and there are many more. There's probably like 50 high quality publications that have been done during COVID. It's really something that as people around the world have taken on board. So with that, I thank you for listening to me. I'll be pleased to answer any questions. And I'm going to turn this back to Steve.